E-bikes outride because they are fun to ride. It's the e-bike guy here again, and we're going to do a little video on troubleshooting. So, what happens when your bike stops working? Well, I've done a little troubleshooting guide. I often pass this out with the bikes when I sell them, and I'm just basically going to read through this. So, it is essentially a decision tree. That's how it's written. So the bike works, but has small issues. In other words, you can turn the throttle, and the wheel moves, etc. Go to page 2 and 3. There's other stuff there. Now, oh no, it stopped working. Now what? Don't panic. So you start doing the questions. Do you still have power on the battery meter when the bike is turned on? If yes, go to good fuse. If no, go to no power. So, no power. Unplug the battery, still no power. Then use a voltmeter to see if there is power at the battery plug. That's rather stupidly written here, still no power. No, just unplug the battery and test and see if you've got power at the battery. If no, open the battery case and ensure all connections are tight to each battery. It wouldn't be the first time I've seen a connection to one of the batteries come loose because it wasn't soldered or crimped. If all connections are tight, then test each 12-volt battery for power. You might have a dead battery. If power is coming from each 12-volt battery, then check the connection at the battery plug directly and check the primary lead cables going to the plug and connecting to each battery together. In other words, the wires at the plug that go to each end of the battery pack might have an issue. And some battery packs have an internal fuse, so if they do have an internal fuse, check the fuse. If blown, go to blown fuse. And here's the blown fuse. Now, if your bike suddenly blows a fuse for some reason, that might be an indication of another problem. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to stick another fuse in. Of course, that may then immediately burn or blow up. So here we go, blown fuse. Unplug the battery and replace fuse. Do not reconnect the plug. We need to see if the controller is blown. If it is blown and you reconnect the fuse, you will blow that fuse and possibly burn your fingers. To test the controller, we need to look at the motor wheel. Push the wheel. Does it have resistance to rotating? If it has resistance, the controller is possibly blown. See blown controller section. If there is no resistance, replace the fuse with a 25 to 35 amp fuse and reconnect the battery. If there's still no power, then look at the connections at the controller. See good fuse. Next section, good fuse. A fuse might look good, but be broken at the metal cap. So replace the fuse with another fuse just to make sure and reconnect the battery. So if you've done that and you still have no power, then look at the connections at the controller. One of the small connectors in the plastic casings might be corroded or dirty or bent enough to not connect. Look at the brake handle sensor on the handlebars as well to see if the sensors have slipped out and thus have disengaged the motor. So on the Nikon bike, the little brake sensors up at the handlebars, they can move. And sometimes it's just a little tiny plastic retainer that holds it in place, and sometimes that little plastic retainer can bend and they can slide out. It's annoying, but anyway. Also make sure the brake lever isn't stuck in a slightly pulled position, because when you pull the brake lever on an e-bike, it trips the sensor and turns off the motor. It's a required safety feature by law. Still not working? Go to blown controller. Blown controller. A blown controller will blow the fuse and give resistance on the rear wheel, stuck in braking regenerative mode. If you are stranded, then disconnect the controller cables and the rear wheel will spin freely, and you can pedal home or pedal to assistance. If you have no tools or Allen wrench or anything like that, then push the bike to the nearest safe place, lock the bike up, and walk or call for assistance. If you have a replacement controller with you, highly unlikely, replace the controller and fuse, and you should be back in operation. As a last resort, when you can't leave the bike and you have no tools, you can try to cut the cable going into the motor at the axle with a knife or a sharp rock. Make sure you leave plenty of room for splicing these cables together again later. Bring the bike in for repair. This cutting of the wire is a last resort kind of thing. Personally, I would hide the bike in the bushes before I would do that, but it's an option. Okay, other problems. Your motor is working intermittently. This is an indication the problem may be inside the motor. Sometimes the wires that connect the hall sensors can break from excessive vibration. I've seen this happen on a Motorino e-bike, but I've never seen it happen on a Cork bike or on a Switch 100 or on any of the conversion kits I've sold. If not at the sensor, then in the wire leading to the sensor. And here, let me just bring up a picture here under maintenance of the motor itself. Yeah, right here, these three wires right here end in a sensor, and these three wires end in a sensor, and these three wires end in a sensor. And what those sensors do is they detect the magnetic field of the magnets that are on the rim, and that's how each coil, these are multiple coils, are told by the controller to power up and push against the magnet. That's how the timing works. So these little wires here could have become broken from the sensor. Highly unlikely, but it's possible. Look at the cabling going into the axle of the motor. Are any cables showing breaks in the plastic covering? Testing or replacing the hulls or connections to them is a complex procedure. More information on this can be found at endlesssphere.com/forums. You'll have to search for a topic on it. Bring the bike in for repair. Now, do I have a picture of the wheel? Okay, I found a picture of a rear wheel, the motor, and you'll notice that the wires here go into the axle, and there's usually a metal coil that protects the wires at the point where they go into the axle. So on some bikes, somebody may have removed that coil from vandalism, or you may have damage along the wire here because of vandalism, or because you've run into something or something like that. But that's what I'm talking about, is right here on the motor. Okay, so the next section, the bike works but no speedometer or battery level reading. There may have been a short or loose connection inside the handlebar control assembly. The unit may need to be replaced if no loose connection can be found. This has happened once to me in 50 bikes sold so far. An aftermarket illegal faster speed controller blew taking it out. So in other words, it wasn't a manufacturing failure. Somebody had jury-rigged the bike to try and make it go faster, not knowing what the hell they were doing, and they blew the part, and then they brought it into me. Okay, the bike is making a chugging, jerking sound when I brake. The regenerative braking circuit of the controller is failing. Immediately turn the bike off, disconnect the battery, undo the two screws on the headlight, not the bottom center one, remove the headlight, trace the two cables coming from the brake handle sensors and disconnect them. Replace the headlight, plug the battery back in. You may operate the bike without regenerative braking in this manner. The brake stop light will no longer function, but at least the controller will not blow, rendering it useless. Replace the controller as soon as possible. Keep the failing controller as an emergency spare. When I originally got the Switch 100 bikes, the controller in the bike did not have any labels, and I had several controllers fail, and it got to the point where it exceeded 3%. So I replaced all the controllers in all my bikes with a beefier, better controller, and continued to sell them that way. That's how I discovered this. It could be that the controllers that I had gotten were old stock or something, and the electrolytes and the capacitors had dried out or something, or they just weren't built properly to handle the amount of electricity that was flowing back into the battery through the regenerative braking, and it was overloading the circuitry of the controller. That cost me a pretty penny when I replaced all those. That took out about 30% of the profit margin on all the bikes. But anyway, that's what I did, because I'm not going to sell people crap. Okay, there is a grinding sound coming from the front tire when I turn. Tighten the front tire bolt. It is loose. Here is a picture of the front of the bike. This bolt right here and the one on the other side, if they become loose, it gives you a bit of extra little space, and the tire will wobble and it will rub against this fender. That is the noise you are hearing. Check your nuts. Check them often. Now, these originally didn't have a little star-like retainer, a lock wash nut, I guess is what they call them. But I purchased them and I put them on all the bikes. They're not required. You don't have to absolutely have them, but it's just something that when I noticed they weren't there, I went out, I bought them, I put them on all the bikes. And it locks that nut into place so that they don't come loose, kind of thing. You can also use a liquid product called Loctite. Basically, it's a liquid that then dries and hardens, and it prevents nuts and bolts from loosening like that as well. Okay, I need to tighten my brakes. The back brake can be tightened just like any bicycle. Loosen the cable nut, pull the cable, loosen the cable nut, pull the cable tighter, pushing the brake arm forward a little, and retighten the nut. The front brake is similar. Hold the bolt and turn the nut to tighten it. So what I'm talking about there is this assembly right here. So you push the lever forward while you're holding onto this stem with a pair of pliers kind of thing, and you turn this nut to tighten it, and that tightens up your brakes. The same thing in the back. Here's the back one down here. You undo this nut, you pull the wire back a bit, and then tighten the nut up, and that'll tighten your brakes. I suppose I can mention this now. Let me find a picture. Okay, I got a couple pictures here. This is the back wheel. Right here, there is a nut that if you tighten it, will tighten the chain. Now, in order to tighten this nut, you need to take off this cover plate and loosen the side bolts on both sides. Then tighten it up, and then tighten everything back up again. But this little nut pulls the wheel back and tightens the rear chain. And it is part of this assembly right here, and the little screw nut thing is right here in this particular picture. That's another way of tightening the rear chain. Okay, the chain is falling off, and this is usually the front where this will happen first. If you have struck the pedal on the ground or sidewalk too hard, you have probably thrown the pedal crankshaft out of alignment. Remove the bottom plastic guard and examine the crankshaft. You may be able to simply tighten the bolts. Remove the top plastic guard to do so. If the metal blocks are bent out of alignment, you may be able to bend them back in place. Now these blocks are designed to tear away in case of a sidewalk strike. So if you bend them too much, you may actually end up tearing the metal. It is best to heat the metal before when attempting that. Bending the metal cold may tear the metal. If the metal is torn, you'll need to replace the block or have it welded. The pedal blocks are designed to fail upon severe impact to protect the frame of the bike and the rider if it happens while riding. Check the sprocket teeth. If any were bent, damaged when you put the chain back on, the bent teeth could be throwing the chain off. Fix the teeth or replace that sprocket. It's really easy to fix the teeth. You just take a pair of pliers and you bend them back. And again, here is that picture where we're talking about that. So right here, this is your block assembly that attaches the axle to the bike, and there's a screw here, or bolt here, and there's a bolt up here, and there's another set over here. So this entire assembly, if this pedal hits a sidewalk, is designed to tear at this point and behind the sprocket at this point and come loose. That way the bike and the rider don't get thrown onto the road. Instead, the blocks tear away and the axle will be bent perpendicular to an angle to the bike. And these are the teeth that I'm talking about right here. These may be bent and you just bend them back. And you got another two sprockets back here as well. So these teeth back here, some people, if the chain is tightened and for some reason it got thrown off and people put the chain back on while it's still really tight, they may do it in such a way that it bends these teeth. So just make sure that you don't have any of those teeth that are bent. Pedaling doesn't work. If you can pedal, but the pedaling does not produce any forward motion, examine the chain to make sure it is not thrown off the sprockets. If the chain is firmly on the sprockets, then see if you have lost the bolt that locks the pedal crankshaft to the chain sprocket. This bolt is held in place by two nuts. If the nuts came loose and fell off, the bolt may have fallen out. Replace the bolt. In an emergency for short-term usage, a short bent nail may suffice. Be sure that neither end of the nail reaches the chain, as the end of the chain may become lodged between the sprocket and chain, derailing the chain or bending the sprocket teeth. And that's the same picture I just showed you, where this bolt, that nut, could come loose and this bolt falls out. And these are the sprocket teeth we're talking about. So if you put a nail in here and that nail is really long, well, the nail may come out and then reach the chain and the sprockets and force the chain off the teeth. The inner tube needs to be changed. Remove the tire. The front tire is obvious, it's like any other bicycle. The back is more complicated. Take the battery out to reduce the bike weight in case you knock the bike over. Tether the bike to something so it does not fall over. Remove the two nuts on each side of the bike, holding the swing arm side covers on, and remove the covers. This is the swing arm, and here to here is the cover. There's a bolt. There's a bolt here, and there's a bolt here that you need to undo, and the same thing on the other side. Loosen the bolts and retainers holding the axle to the frame. And that is this black thing here. This is a retainer. And you can't see it, but it attaches the fender. Yeah, let's see if I can get a better picture. Oh, I don't appear to have a better picture. Anyway, the swing arm under this cover, the swing arm goes back and ends in a rectangular ending, I guess you would call it, and the black covers slide up and over that. So that's what I'm talking about. So those are the retainers I'm talking about. Undo the bolt on the brake side, holding the brake to the frame. So right here is a piece of metal that goes up, and there's a bolt that holds this metal piece in place, keeping the brake cable in the proper position. So there is a bolt up here that you have to undo. And then you can remove the tire. Now the power cable going to the motor may need to be pulled for a little bit more slack. There's a couple metal clips on the bottom of the bike that you can just slightly bend with your fingers and pull the wire out a little bit more to give you that extra little bit of wire. So remove the tire, push the tire to the center of the rim, and remove the tire. And by center of the rim, this is a picture of the rim. There is a groove in the center of the rim that gives you more play. So that's what I'm talking about by pushing it to the center. So pushing the tire to the center of the rim will give the needed slack to remove the tire. If you are unable to find a bent stem inner tube, do not try to bend the stem of the tube that you have. It will ruin the stem. Instead, you can use a drill to change the angle of the stem hole in the rim that the stem goes through. Instead of drilling the one that's already there, I would actually recommend going to the opposite side of the tire, of the opposite side of the rim, and go slightly to one side and drill a hole there for the stem. Be sure to sand the edges of the hole, otherwise the sharp edges may give you another flat directly on the stem or where the stem meets the tire. Now I've done this on my own bike. It's real simple and easy to do. You just take a drill through, keep using that drill to make the hole wide enough for the stem that goes through, and then you just use like a screwdriver to blunt the sharpness of what you've just drilled, and use a little bit of sandpaper to make sure that there's no sharp edges anywhere. The fender. I lost the nuts holding the fender on. So right here, there's two tiny little nuts that attach the back fender to the retention bar. So replace them and use Loctite or some electrical tape or something to ensure the replacements don't come loose. If you can't find screws that match the threading that's there, just use a short bolt and nut. If you have broken the arms of the fender, most likely due to somebody vandalizing your bike, you should replace the fender, but in the meantime, several layers of electrical tape may reduce the noise until then. Somebody vandalized my bike in this manner, and what I did is I took a coat hanger and I bent it to the appropriate dimensions, and up on the fender I drilled a hole through the fender and just made a clip that I could then put a bolt through to hold the coat hanger to the fender. and I bent the ends of the coat hanger just into eye hooks kind of thing, and put a bolt through the eye hook and right into the original holes that were there. And it actually kind of looks like it was originally designed that way, just like a regular bike. It looks just like a regular bike's fender. Anyway, the charger is dead. If the charger does not light up, it may indeed be dead. If you have been plugging it directly into the wall instead of using a surge suppressor, it may have been blown by power surge from the wall. Replace the charger with a 2 amp, you can push it to maybe 4 amps, 48 volt SLA charger. Most chargers these days, really good ones, will have a fuse on both ends of the charger, one from the power cable coming in from the wall, and another one between the charger and the battery pack. And that way you can protect both ends of the charger and replace the fuse if needed, if anything ever does happen, kind of thing. And that is the end of my little troubleshooting guide. I hope it was of use. If you ever need a paper copy of this, just send me an email. And you can send that email to les_leblanc@yahoo.ca. And that again is les_leblanc@yahoo.ca. les_leblanc@yahoo.ca. And I can send you a PDF copy of this troubleshooting guide. Anyway, that's it for this little video. Happy e-biking.